right, if everybody could take their seats, please, we'll get started. All right, if everybody could start to find their way, there's always plenty of seats in the front. And that's why we put the seats so far to the front. Oh, I gotta turn the music off. All right, front row is for the Fearless. Is this a splash zone up here? If everybody could gather all the way in the front, we'll get the program started here shortly. Great, awesome. Thanks everybody for coming. We're going to kick things off. Welcome to this afternoon at Union Hall for a Fearless conversation with Gene Case. But first, we're going to kick things off with Cincinnati Mayor John Cranley.
Good evening. It is great to be back here. For those of you who haven't had the privilege of hearing Gene speak today, you're in for a treat. Very inspirational, and I think calls us to our better angels, both in terms of social and racial equity, but also in dreaming big, going big, and being fearless. I was asked to just mention a few ways in which we as Cincinnati can be proud of times when we have been fearless and it has worked out, and ways where we continue to be. We can continue to show fearlessness and make a big difference. I want to point out that where we're literally sitting and standing is a point, an inflection point in our city's history about fear and fearlessness and race and equity. This building, before it became Union Hall, was literally the location where Timothy Thomas was chased by the police, that then led to his being killed and 4 days of racial unrest. This was a neighborhood for many years that was fearful. And it was a city that had fear based in prejudice. And it took a big risk to bring the Justice Department in and to try to heal racial tensions and fix the social contract. And I submit to all of you that our city would not see the renaissance we're seeing if we hadn't made not perfect conclusion to, but real progress on police-community relations and greater racial and economic inclusion. It's also took fearlessness to convert this building into a location of small business and entrepreneurialism and innovation and tech and centrifuge and the brandery and mortar and all the wonderful partners that we have here over the years. A couple other elements. One of the most fearless thing I ever did that I'm most proud of in my professional life was starting the Ohio Innocence Project, which uses DNA evidence to get people out of prison who are innocent. And the University of Cincinnati Law School, which still runs that program under the great leadership of Mark Gotze, has gotten 28 people out of prison who were innocent. And it's something that you see in law school can and should be proud of. A couple of other things that we have done. When I was elected and the council members who were elected at the same time, we had 20 years of contracts that were only 2% African American. I promised to take it to 15% of all contracts within 4 years. We got it to 17% in 4 years after 20 years being stuck at 2%. Couple things we're doing going forward, because you're here to hear Gene speak, not me, that we as a community are going to try to be fearless on going forward. Most important, I believe, is the Child Poverty Collaborative, where there's a collaboration of the business community, the human service groups, the nonprofits, the United Way, job training efforts to help beat the national average of helping 5,000 families get out of poverty over the next 5 years here in Cincinnati. The newspaper said to me when we announced this goal, aren't you setting yourself up for failure? What if you only get 3,000 families out of poverty instead of 5,000? I said, what if we only got 3,000 families out of poverty instead of 5,000? I think your question answers your question. We also are launching this massive effort at sustainability, the largest that we know of, municipal-led solar installation project in the country, 25 megawatts that we're going to break ground on this year. And I want to make this last point, and I want to turn it over to Gene. Solar costs roughly 7 cents a kilowatt fully amortized, and we're going to do 25 megawatts. The city consumes about 125 megawatts of energy a year, from distributing water to 2 million people to lighting the electricity and air conditioning at City Hall. We have significantly over 25 megawatts of energy that is more expensive than 7 cents a kilowatt on coal. We have some that's cheaper than 7 cents a kilowatt, but we have probably 40 to 50 megawatts that is more expensive than solar renewable energy. That's true of every government, every homeowner, every business in this country. And the only thing stopping from going green is inertia. At least into all that low-hanging fruit, which could probably convert 25 to 30% of CO2-based emissions to clean and renewable. And by the time we catch up with that low-hanging fruit, which literally saves you and taxpayers money, the cost of solar will go down again, and the next wave will also open up whole new sets of opportunities. So thank you. So going green is also going green in the pocket as well. So those are just some of the ways that we're being fearless. And Gene, thank you for the book. Thank you for your time, and thank you for spending time in our Queen City. Thank you very much.
So for those of you who don't know me, I am Bill Tucker. I am the executive director of an organization called Flywheel Social Enterprise Hub. And it was over 6 months ago that I got a phone call from Wendy Lee, who said, hey, could you help us? We've got this thing going on, and I think it'd be great if you could collaborate with Centrifuge in bringing Gene Case to town. And so Wendy, who by the way is in the back of the room, I think a round of applause for Wendy and her leadership. And I also need to call out the staff at Centrifuge, which has done an amazing job of helping make this event happen. And again, I'm going to call out Eric Weissman, who's done an awesome job of making it all work. It's that kind of collaboration that is what makes the difference in this community. It's something that Gene has seen all day long, and we're really, really proud of that. But I have a wish for this group in the room tonight, and it's this. And actually for those who are watching via live stream, because that's taking place as well. I hope that you walk out of here inspired to be fearless and to recognize that fear is not your enemy. It should not be your enemy. You should find ways to take those risks and really move forward to this community. So whether your role in this community is as an entrepreneur, or maybe it's an investor, or maybe it's just somebody who likes to hang around smart people, we hope that what you'll do is you'll invest in this community with your time and your talent and your treasure. Speaking of collaboration and what's going on in Cincinnati, I want to turn the microphone over to Centrifuge CEO Pete Blackshaw. So Pete.
Thanks, Bill. Welcome to Union Hall. It's been an honor to come back here after about 8 years away, and I have to say that the energy here, this building, 38,000 square feet of co-working space, was a huge motivation. And at Centrifuge, we have the honor of helping to manage this, but it's really your house. I mean, it's a house of hacks, it's a house of entrepreneurialism, about creativity, and I encourage all of you to take advantage of it. We're here to serve you, we're here to help you be fearless and to kind of realize your big ambitions, your moonshots. The potential in this region is enormous. We have a very singular ambition at Centrifuge, which is to be the #1 startup hub in the Midwest and a top innovation center in the nation. And we do that by trying to stitch together the ecosystem. So welcome to the house, and we look forward to working with you. And I'm so excited. I've been on a high all day because I had a chance to have breakfast with Gene Case, and what you're going to hear today is really going to energize you, and I know it's going to help create value for our community. Now, Eric, is there anything else? Here we go. So, oh, yes. Yeah, and listen, we're getting great results, and I hope that all of you will be ambassadors, especially for folks that are on the outside or boomerang prospects that are wondering, should I come back? Give them reason to believe that we're building really important momentum. You know, we're increasing the amount of deal flow. Cincy Tech is playing a big role in that, the Angels. But help us build confidence. The potential is absolutely enormous. And again, thank you for being here. And we have a sizzle video, right? That's right. Here we go. A little reason to believe.
If you added up all the times you failed, all the times you came up short, would you try again? What if failure wasn't a limitation? What if taking risks was your status quo? What kind of world would you imagine? When the challenges we face seem overwhelming, we need to experiment with new thinking and try new things, create unlikely partnerships, and set audacious goals. To build a better world, to make a real difference, we have to take bigger risks, make bigger bets. And if we fail and fail again, we have to get right back up and dream even bigger. To live in a world worth living in, we have to let challenge inspire us. We have to take risks, be bold, and let urgency conquer fear. We have to be fearless.
All right. Who's ready to be fearless? Yes? Oh, goodness. So you are in for a treat, as Mayor Cranley and I think everyone else has mentioned today as we get ready to hear from Gene Case. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Kyla Woods. I have the honor of moderating this conversation with Gene this evening for your hopefully your listening pleasure. And we will have a period of time for questions right after the conversation, so I hope you are getting them ready. There's always that little pause when we ask for questions and no one wants to go. We're not going to do that tonight, are we? Nope, everyone's going to be ready, all right? So thank you all again so much for being here. At this time, I would like to introduce CEO of the Case Foundation, Chair of the National Geographic's Board, and author of Be Fearless. Please welcome Gene Case. So I have only spent a limited amount of time so far with Jean, and I'm looking forward to this conversation, but she has already inspired me greatly just in the short amount of time that we've had together. So
that's very nice.
Thank you for that. Yes. So tell us about how you got started, just where the notion of Be Fearless came from, how you evolved as a person and got to the point that we're at today, and what you've poured into this book.
Sure. Well, let me start by saying hello, Cincinnati. It is a true delight to be here. I've been looking forward to it. Everywhere I've been today, I've said, rarely have I come to a community where I felt so much love before I even got on the ground. The messages you are sending out to the world were heard, and I'm grateful. I think there are some people in here I've heard will be here that are kind of connected, so I'm going to be around after this and look forward to saying hello to a lot of you. But to your question, so yes, the new book is called Be Fearless: 5 Principles for a Life of Breakthroughs and Purpose. And while it is my first book, it's actually work that we've been dealing with at the Case Foundation for some number of years. You know, I had this private sector career in technology for about 2 decades before my husband and I co-founded our family foundation, the Case Foundation that I run. And then for about the last 15 years, I've been deeply engaged in the work of the National Geographic Society. So all of those different roles have taken me around the world and around the nation, to big cities, to communities, to remote villages. And anywhere I would go, I would see the same thing. And that is that people everywhere, despite their background, despite where they're from, you know, what they sort of bring to the table, have great ideas. Really, you know, great ideas about how to make the world a better place. but they often really get stuck on this idea of, oh, that's not me. I can't do that. And so, that sort of has always been kind of maddening to me. So at the Case Foundation about 6 years ago, we conducted some research looking at the core qualities of entrepreneurs, change makers, and innovators. And what we found were these 5 simple principles that I talk about in the book and that we'll talk about in this time together. But more importantly, we could debunk this myth that it takes something super special. Debunk the myth that it takes a special genius or having the right degree or a certain number of connections. It turns out any study of transformational and breakthrough successes across sectors, across time, across geographies, as ours went, will prove that it's ordinary people who do extraordinary things. But how they get there is through the application of these 5 simple principles. So that's a reason for the book. We've been out sharing those principles for the last 6 years, again, across sectors, with lots of different kind of leaders and communities and institutions. And we've been quite taken with their impact in terms of inspiring people to be a little more fearless. And I like to say at the start of any talk that being fearless is not the absence of fear, because everybody feels fear. I still do on a regular basis, almost every day. It's really that ability to stare fear in the face, push past it with courage, and do the hard things.
I love that concept because it's not saying, oh, don't ever feel fearful, because we do all naturally feel that. But instead of thinking of it as the absence, it is, how do I overcome this fear right now? What steps can I take to get beyond that? So when you talk about the principles of the book, making the big bet, how did you come up with that as a principle? What is the thought process behind that, and kind of what faith goes into making that step and making that bet?
Right. Well, where you see big change, it started with a big bet. And what do we mean by that? And big bets can look different depending on sort of the circumstances that you're in. But it means not settling for incremental change, not aiming for incremental change, but truly a big, big bet. And we like to say make big bets and make history, because that's the story of history, as I've tried to point out that our research revealed. Now, the thing about big bets is, you don't sort of decide today I'm making a big bet and the next time you check in is when you've arrived at it. How big bets happen, of course, is through smaller incremental steps. And, I think that's an important part of the story. In the book, I have both unknowns. It's a storytelling book to bring the principles to life. And I have stories that you will have never heard of, I'm quite certain. But you'll also have many stories of those that you have heard about. And I try to take the reader behind better known success stories to point out that it was more of an incremental, small step climb to a really big idea, including, by the way, a company I profile is Airbnb. If you don't know their story, it's a really interesting one. But more importantly, when I take the reader behind the curtain of success stories that you might think you know well, I show them the failures that took place on the way to success. And there's a chapter there called Fail in the Footsteps of Giants. Because the bottom line is we sanitize success stories way too often. And we do a disservice, particularly to younger people, but to all of us, with this idea that you can achieve success without having failures along the way. So Oprah Winfrey, for instance, in her first job as a news reporter, she was fired. But more importantly, she was told she's just not right for television. She has one of the biggest media empires in the world today, right? Or J.K. Rowling, who wrote Harry Potter as a single mom on welfare, okay? Another example of no one looking at that life would say, oh, she's necessarily really going somewhere. She was rejected by 12 publishers before the Harry Potter manuscript was accepted. So it's just really important to know that success does come at a cost, but the good news is failures are often those moments that can set you up for better things down the line.
And I love that Oprah story. I mean, we all love Oprah. If you don't love Oprah in the room, just don't say anything, okay? Everybody loves Oprah. I love that story, and every time I hear it, I just am inspired by hearing it, A. And B, there's another story that she tells that I don't know that is, she tells it maybe as widely, about when she went in and asked for equal payment of what her co-anchor was making when she was working on a television show in Chicago. And her boss told her that she didn't deserve to have the same payment as him because he had a family and she didn't have children. And why do you need as much money as he has when he has children in a house? And so but she was fearless and she fought for that.
Yeah.
So how do we carry kind of that spirit of fearlessness into, especially as women, when you have communities of color that are afraid to ask for those things? What would you advise them to do?
Well, you know, I walked into the building today and there's a quote from Thomas Edison that I love. I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 things that won't work. You know, Einstein said failure is success in progress, but we don't look at it that way. You know, we say crash and burn instead of crash and learn. But failure teaches, and the third principle is make failure matter. And this is very well understood in risk-taking in certain disciplines of medicine or science or technology, where they use what? R&D. And R&D is trial and error, right? But when you get outside of those disciplines that understand the critical role of failing and errors, why do they understand that? Because that's how you perfect and sharpen an idea. That's how you grow stronger and understand both what's not working but what can work down the line. And you know, it's just, so if we could have that mindset of when we're failing, you know, it's like something good is down the road, I'm on my way to success, but it doesn't feel like that in the moment. And we were talking about Oprah just now, and you know, she gave a whole commencement address at Harvard on failure, and she was very authentic. And I would say the same thing, I'm very authentic in the book about my failures. And you know, when you go through them, it's easy to say, the world is over. I'm done. Like, I guess, you know, I just want to go hide now. That's how it feels when you're in it. But if really we could adopt a better view of the importance of failure in teaching and shaping and helping us get better, I just think we'd have a different world. And so part of the reason I wrote the book is for those that had been through this sort of curriculum that we teach out there to organizations, to boards, to students, you name it, around Be Fearless. We really saw a change in people in terms of how they approached both risk-taking, thinking about it a little bit more like R&D so it's less scary, right? And if you take those incremental steps, if you fail at a step, it doesn't mean the whole idea is dead, right? We began to see a change in the way people approached big ideas and a willingness to be a little bolder, to take a few more risks and push past failure when it comes. And you know, that's the hope for putting the book out. There was actually people who had been through the work who said, we wish more people were exposed to this. And it was out of that that we decided at the Case Foundation that a book should be written, and it was clear I was going to be the one to write it.
There wasn't anyone better to write it, though, so we're glad
we have
you
a great
did.
team. But yeah.
So speaking about failure, you actually got to spend some time with quite a few entrepreneurs today during your stay in Cincinnati. So not saying that all of them have failed, but undoubtedly some of them have, you know, stumbled across failure at some point and maybe shared some of those stories with you, or even if not that, maybe some experiences you've had in the entrepreneurial landscape, hearing about failure and encouraging folks to push through that and seeing the breakthrough on the other side. What inspires you to speak so strongly about that and encourage especially small business and entrepreneurs to really see failure as a learning curve?
Well, you know, sometimes in some environments, and this is certainly true in Silicon Valley today, you know, not only is failure okay, in some cases, it's celebrated. And entrepreneurs can wear it as a badge. I think maybe that's taking it a little too extreme sometimes, which is, woohoo, failure! Okay, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about an acceptance that it is a necessary and indeed important part of the process about breaking through. Entrepreneurs do tend to know that, but the entrepreneurs that I spent time with today, entrepreneurs I spent time with, quite frankly, in Silicon Valley last week, you know, there is an inner fear, even amongst themselves, about, you know, what it means to push past failure. Look, the bottom line is when you're out there trying to do something big, something transformative, taking your big bet forward, You will have, failings along the way. We just need to get to a point where we understand that that's okay and keep going. And, I do say for me as an investor, I would rather invest in an entrepreneur who is on her third company, maybe having failed once or twice, than I would an entrepreneur who's on her first company. Because I just know she has learned some lessons and it's actually true. I'm deeply invested in one right now who I've been mentoring for a long time. She's on her third company because she really learned a lot of lessons in the first 2 failures, and I know she'll be stronger as a result.
And that is so great to hear. I mean, it's interesting, and hopefully it's inspiring for someone who might be on that second or third venture and feeling like, do I give up? Or is this, should I keep going? Keep going, because there's people who are looking for you on that second or third or fourth,
And
turn
Kyla,
around.
I tell a story. So there's a chapter in the book called Take the Long View. And I tell the story of Milton Hershey. And how many people love Hershey? I do. Okay, so that company was started over 100 years ago. And Milton was raised in tough circumstances. His dad abandoned the family, and at age 14, he became an apprentice in what was then called a confectioneer, which is candy making business. Okay, so I don't know, somewhere around 16, 17 years old, he breaks out on his own with a small loan from his aunt. He opens his first candy store. And about 3 years later, he closes his first candy store. It's a failure. So then he decides, okay, well, I'm going to try and get more training. I'm going to move out to Denver. My dad's there. I'm going to start another candy business out there and see if I can really make a run of this thing. So he does that. And several years later, that candy store shuts down. Can't make a go of it. So he hears about some stuff going on in Philadelphia, and he takes himself to Philadelphia. His family had been from Pennsylvania. Now he's on his third try. He's not a young man. And that fails. His family's having a family reunion now. They don't want Milton to come because Milton is considered a loser and a drifter, okay? So he comes back to his hometown, and his mom and his aunt say, hey, you're worth one more shot at this. We believe in you. And they give him like a $40 loan. And he starts a caramel company. That was such a success that he made $1 million. He sold that company, and that's what he used to found Hershey Company that we know today. He was in his 40s by that time. So, that was a lot of chapters of trying to make stuff work. Think about yourself if you had, a brother, a daughter, you name it. Would you be willing to, keep championing him on? I mean, it's an interesting story, but the really cool thing about the Hershey story, he and his wife could not have children, and he loved his wife with all of his life. That's really obvious in all of their writings. And she died. But before she died, they started a school for children who otherwise wouldn't be able to have an education, basically poor kids. And he took all of his stock after she died and put it in trust for this school. And today, that school has a $12 billion endowment. So not only did he build a great company, and particularly those that are going, wow, I know you serve on private school boards. You're going, that $12 billion would feel really nice. But it's so rare. I mean, it's more like an Ivy League kind of endowment. So not only did he build a transformational company, just in terms of, what its products have done through the years, but more importantly, he left a legacy of good behind in the community that he came from that will endure probably forever.
My goodness, I've never heard that story. That is incredible. And it's perfect for what my next question was going to be around philanthropy as investment. So we've covered, that story in itself covers quite a bit. But when we look at how he invested and he gave back and the endowment, how it's grown, I'm sure he never would have imagined that it would do all of that. So how do we reframe our minds to think about philanthropy as investments in our community? There's a part in your book that I love where you talk about your mom didn't call it something lofty like philanthropy, because a lot of times our parents and grandparents, maybe they didn't call it that. It was just giving back, or it was through the church and tithes, or whatever it was called, but it really is the heart of philanthropy. So how do we start to reimagine that in a fearless way of philanthropy as investment?
Well, I must say I saw a lot of it on the ground here today. The mayor spoke to some things, but I was truly impressed with the generosity of this community, but more importantly, some of the big bets that philanthropy is taking. And you're right. So I was born in a town called Normal, Illinois. Now, it turns out some people in Ohio actually know Normal, Illinois, but in most places they kind of go, really? And I was the youngest of 4 kids being raised by a single mom. So my mom graduated high school and had no further education after that. And you're right, when I told her after I retired from technology and said, I really want a second career and I think I'm going to focus on philanthropy. And she said, that's nice, what's philanthropy? It just wasn't a word known to her, but what was known to her is how neighbor helps neighbor and how community looks after community. And, I do think there are opportunities everywhere that I saw today. And I do want to just say the collaboration I saw is probably the greatest single sign I saw that will point you towards success here and some of the big bets you're making in your community. We should probably talk about Reach Beyond Your Bubble, which is another principle. But I saw a lot of collaboration here, and collaboration is really a key. I also, earlier today, talked to a group, some of those folks are here this evening, about impact investing today. Some people call it social impact investing. And that is now using the power of capital to really drive social impact. Not power of philanthropy, power of investment capital. And I had the privilege of spending some time here with some of the entrepreneurs who are building impact companies, have real sort of impact-driven ideas. There is a class of investors, many who were with us today, who really understand that capital has the power to transform lives and communities. And I shared with them that when I was teaching an MBA class at the Yale School of Management, this kid who was kind of nervous and shy in the back row, raised his hand, and I said, yeah, and he said, well, I just could never figure out why you would only settle for a financial return on your investments. And he was on to a really deep idea, right? He's calling us out. He's saying we're even, selling ourselves short in how we're using capital if we're not demanding more from the capital we invest. And the good news is, I know Hello Tractor's here, Van. There are so many remarkable companies out there that are changing the world in the very nature of their business. I'm not talking about putting a foundation over there. I'm saying central to the business model is a desired social impact. And I think, what I saw here in Cincinnati today is quite inspirational on that front.
Thank you. That's a big compliment. So we appreciate that. Reaching beyond your bubble, I do want to go right into that. And first, I want to thank you for a tribute you have on your site right now to Madam C.J. Walker. It's beautiful. Yes, Madam C.J. Walker. It's beautiful. I've been a fan of hers since I was a little girl. But talking about how she started her business, how they were going door to door, how she wanted to invest in the next generation of entrepreneurs by teaching them how to be salespeople, how to make their own income. And this is at a time when women, especially Black women, were not doing this for themselves. So reaching beyond your bubble, bringing it back to that, I feel like if you were around and Madam CJ was around, you'd reach across the aisle and say, how can I help you do this? How can I be an ally for you? How do I help you with your business? What can I offer you? Why is that so important? And why is that so important to you and to philanthropy in general?
Well, I heard a little bit of woohoo on Madam CJ Walker, but not everybody in the world knows who she is.
I realize that
you're
now.
An Indianapolis girl.
I am.
And we were just in Indianapolis last week, and for those of you that don't know her story, she built this incredible hair care empire. She ended up employing 3,000 people in Indianapolis. During her lifetime, she became one of the community's most celebrated philanthropists, and not just community, nation's most celebrated philanthropist. And she was born the daughter of a slave 100 years ago. And many consider that she was perhaps the first self-made female millionaire in America. This Reach Beyond Your Bubble thing, it is powerful. And of the 5 principles that were uncovered through the research we funded, Reach Beyond Your Bubble was most illuminating to us. And the idea is such a simple one. At one level you go, of course that makes sense. But the idea is bring together teams, build partnerships that are unlikely, where you bring different backgrounds, different perspectives to tackle a problem or chase an opportunity. And I like to say, if we were working together, you could broaden my perspective on something because you have a different way of looking at it. I hopefully could cover some of the blind spots and vice versa. So it makes total sense when you think about it. But it's really a powerful principle behind what drives success. Now, here's a concern I have. In America today, startups are at a 30-year low. Startups have been the economic engine of the United States. It is the American dream writ large. That's what, building a company, anyone can build a company anywhere, is supposed to be the idea of America, right? But the data is stark. Last year, less than 2% of venture capital that drives high growth companies went to firms with a female founder. Less than 1% to firms with an African American founder. And 79% of venture capital went to just 3 places: Massachusetts, California, and New York. So states like Ohio, which are pretty big and important states, states like Florida, which is the 3rd largest state in our country now, got 2% of venture capital. So not only are our startups down, but we're kind of leaving on the sidelines about 50% of our players. We need all the players on the field. We need all the ideas on the field. And we all should take seriously this idea that we can play a role in helping bring them to the field, championing their ideas, funding their ideas. The good news is the fastest growing segments of entrepreneurs are people of color and women. They're growing at a remarkable rate. We just haven't really yet nailed it in terms of making sure they have the same opportunities as their counterparts. And I think it's an economic imperative and an innovation imperative, because a lot of the innovation that we've been bringing forward in the nation has mostly been designed for people who just might get a little more comfortable or have a few more, options to choose from in the way they live their life. There's a lot of communities where we haven't looked seriously at the economic opportunity to bring products and services to them. And this new class of entrepreneurs, which mostly has been left on the sidelines, will do just that. So it's an exciting opportunity in America. And then added finally, the good news data is time and time again, whether it's McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, Deloitte, there's overwhelming, compelling data that diverse teams and women-led firms are outperforming their counterparts. So there's lots of data to say it's really smart business and smart investing too. So that keeps me hopeful.
It is, we have to find the hope, right? Because sometimes when we look at those discrepancies or disparities, when you talk about, especially with women and in communities of color, where you see the 1% or the 2%, it can be discouraging, but that's why when I started about the story about Madam C.J. Walker, thank you for being an ally, thank you for seeing her and for appreciating her work, and I think if we do more of that, across the landscape of philanthropy and in our fearlessness, not being afraid to stand up and say in a room or on a website, well, there's no one here that doesn't look like me or does look like me. There's no one there. It's a really monochromatic picture that we're seeing there, but not being afraid to speak up and say that.
And I would even say here in Cincinnati, when you're sitting in rooms and important decisions are being made or you're working on a really hard problem, look around. Make sure, and bubbles, you can have a diverse mix of people without it being obvious outside looking in, by the way, different perspectives, different ideas. But it is really important. And again, it's not just me coming here and saying, oh, there's a social justice need at work here. This is me coming and saying, research has told us that this is how you reach transformational breakthroughs. And so, if you really see a bright promise and a bright future for Cincinnati, and I know so many of you do, and you're working in your own way or with the team, just really ask yourself that question are my partnerships, are my teams, are the people I've put together to work on something, have we reached beyond our bubble? It's powerful.
It's really powerful, and again, it does require, from what I found, a level of fearlessness for people who might not always be comfortable in that space. So I just want to encourage you, be willing to take that chance and speak up on behalf maybe of people who are not in that room with you. So when we talk about transformational change, sitting on the board, not sitting on the board, being the chair of the board for National Geographic, what transformational changes have you seen as far as it relates to being fearless with science and exploration? Tell us about that, your experiences with that and why it's so important for you to maybe translate this concept of be fearless into your work with National Geographic.
Well, it was a snowy night in Washington, D.C. in January of 1888 when 33 founders came together to create the National Geographic Society. So it's 131 years old as of January. We're so fortunate in that fearlessness has been in the DNA of the institution truly from its birth. I mean, we've always been about science and exploration, and as many of you know, we like to say we bring people to the front lines of the unknown, and we've been doing that, for 131 years, and we're very fortunate that way. But there's kind of a funny story that I think demonstrates some of the fearlessness. First, before I go off on that story, let me say on the Reach Beyond Your Bubble, over 100 years ago, there was a really amazing woman by the name of Eliza Skidmore, and she was our first editor and photographer in the National Geographic magazine, which was a serious scientific journal 100 years ago. And if that isn't impressive enough, she was a board member 100 years ago at National Geographic. Now, let me just put that in context for you. It's 2019. I serve on a lot of boards. There are still boards where I am the only female. So to think that our institution 100 years ago had a female on the board, I think really says a lot. But the funny thing is, 100 years ago, new tech was photography. It was kind of a new thing. It was like, all the rage. And so the magazine editor, in telling the stories of exploration and bringing some of the scientific things, trying to, in this journal, bring them to life, said to the board, I want to integrate photographs, to really bring the stories to life. The board had a fit. That's a fad. That's not serious science. It was quite a row. We have the minutes from the board meeting. 2 board members ended up resigning. The fearless board said, yes, we are doing photography. And this week, 2 things happened at National Geographic. We won an Oscar for our documentary Free Solo. Thank you for the fist bump. And we're the first brand on the globe to pass 100 million Instagram followers. Now imagine 100 years ago if the board had said, don't you go messing with that future stuff. That's not what we are. But I've seen this institution do it time and time again, and I just want to pause here and say you all, many leaders are in the organization or in the audience, but even if you're not a leader, wherever you are, I think it's important to ask the question, are we peeking around corners? Are we seeing where the future needs to go? Are we willing to take some risks as a community, as an organization, and get uncomfortable? As I said, nothing great comes from the comfort zone. All the great things that we've seen, in terms of breakthroughs, really require people to get a little uncomfortable. And I'm so grateful at National Geographic that we have always had sort of that fearlessness in our DNA that allows us to take risk after risk after risk and push the boundaries.
So I have a little bit of a feeling that maybe that got so much applause because unfortunately, I don't know that every board is willing to be as fearless as the National Geographic's board. And having you as the leader, I'm sure has a lot to do with that. So how would you encourage entrepreneurs, nonprofits that are in positions where they want to take risk and they want to take a chance and they want to do something different, but all they keep hearing is, we've done it for 30 years this way and that's fine. How do you get them to do a respectful pushback without having to worry about any sort of retaliation? Sometimes those spaces can get a little messy. I'm sure that you know this. But what would you say to a founder or a president or in this room who wants to challenge maybe their board or their decision makers to take the risk and be fearless?
Well, first of all, I do spend a lot of time with boards, and I have in the years we've been out teaching this. And even one of your fine institutions here in town, I've spent time with their national board. I think it is kind of a big challenge in many cases, but I'd probably start with a cautionary tale that I wrote about in the book. Many of you have heard of it, some may not. The story of Kodak. Kodak was picking up on that photography thing. Kodak was very early to photography and developed the first consumer branded camera. Before that, it's almost like bringing the internet to the masses. It was democratization of photography. It was a small camera called the Brownie, and it was a phenom, okay? Now consumers could take photographs. But through time, Kodak really grew their business based on the old film, rolls of film. Some people are young enough, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But so much so that I think at their height, they literally had 90% market share in film. Okay, enter two Kodak engineers who come in and say, we discovered a form of photography that doesn't need film. Digital photography was born at Kodak. That's where it was invented. But imagine going into that room of a business that lived off of film and saying, we think this could be where the future is going. It would scare you to death, right? You would think it was almost an existential thing. It's easy to look back and think, oh, how could they miss that? You could understand how they could miss that. So of course they didn't permit that digital photography to be developed at Kodak. And what happened? Others found it too. So soon their market share in film went like that, and then they hit chapter 11. And it's such a cautionary tale because it was literally invented at Kodak. I think those cautionary tales are good to revisit from time to time. What ideas are we hearing or risks we're not willing to take that could actually come back and truly not only disrupt us, but potentially allow others to kind of eat our lunch? But the other thing is, in the book, I try to be very realistic about how hard change is. And sometimes the older the organization or the more established legacy related it is, the harder it is to drive change. Chances are your organization, your board, could do one thing to take a risk. If you really talked about where you want to try some new things or maybe what's not working, you could maybe clear 1% of budget to try some new things. There are a number of different approaches that you can take. Again, I call it a toe in the water approach, but you could begin to start taking some risks, testing. I talk about don't bet the farm on, the first idea that you're taking, but what are some small things that you could begin to do to get a little more comfortable with risk taking and use risk taking as this kind of looking at it more as R&D, where you're expecting that trial and error.
I've never heard that Kodak story either, and that is really eye-opening. So when you think about that as a cautionary tale to your boards or to whoever you're trying to encourage to really take that step, because I think there's enough of us in this room that knew Kodak as the leader in photography, and to hear that trajectory go down because they were afraid to take risks, I think hopefully will bode well for any of you who might be in the room that are just needing somebody to take that push and make that step and be fearless.
And I'll channel National Geographic here again, because the other thing we forget is at one time new media was cable television, and print media was scared to death. And so National Geographic, all of its sort of profits that it used to fund cool stuff out there came from a print magazine, and saw this new media coming and thought, So they reached beyond their bubble in the coolest of ways. This was before I arrived. And they built a strategic partnership with Fox to deliver the National Geographic Channel. Now, I think about how many nonprofit boards would sit around and say, hey, let's do a partnership with a really big media company. That wouldn't necessarily come so naturally to your nonprofit kind of ethos. But, that truly, and as I look back, saved National Geographic, because our channels have been wildly successful. And then the new era of disruption was digital. And we knew we couldn't just cling to television and to print. And we went all into digital. I told you what happened with Instagram. But we have the largest social media footprint in the world today of any brand, not just on Instagram. But that really has required exactly that hard stuff of disrupting ourselves. 3 years ago, our board extended the joint venture with 21st Century Fox, and we put all of our commercial businesses in it. Before, we had some that came directly up to National Geographic Society and weren't part of that venture. When we did that, we created a $1.2 billion endowment. And every year, $100 million comes over the transom to help fund our work from the profits of that venture. So it's a really great example of kind of reaching beyond your bubble and thinking about the kind of partnerships you build and, you know, truly making a big bet that maybe with a partner you can go farther and faster. We're super excited. Disney is poised to close the transaction of buying 21st Century Fox, and Disney will become our new partner in the joint venture in days going forward.
It's exciting, and I think I'm probably not alone in this, but if you catch a documentary or a show and there's an animal just waiting to pounce on I mean, like, you're gonna lock me in for the next, I don't know, hour? How long is the Jaguar gonna wait? Are they gonna go right now? Well, let me just wait here. I know dinner's on the stove, but I'm gonna wait. Honey, come look. Honey, look. Things are happening right now. I mean, so I'm excited to hear that. It's promising to know we'll have lots more of that coming.
I think so, and all kinds of new opportunities for the brand with Disney as our partner, as you might imagine.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Well, speaking of the 5 principles, I'm going to name them, and then I'd love for you to tell us maybe what your favorite is, if you can pick a favorite, or any experiences that you might want to share based on any of the principles. So make a big bet, which we talked about. Be bold, take risks, make failure matter, reach beyond your bubble, and let urgency conquer fear. So which one of those has maybe been most important in your life?
I would say let urgency conquer fear. And, you know, this sense of urgency plays a much bigger role than I think we appreciate. It is that agitation you feel inside. It could be you're gripped with fear, discontentment, frustration, maybe even anger, but you're saying something's got to change. And I love it if you say something's got to change, and I've got something to do about that. And it's that urgency, and that is truly the secret sauce of what pushes people out of their comfort zones and gets them willing to take some risks, to make some big bets, to bring change, where in normal course and speed and living in your comfort zone, you won't necessarily, you know, get out there on that limb to try to bring the kind of change that, you know, you really need, you think you need to see. And I tell the story, we have the privilege of having a dear friend, Chef Jose Andres, and he's really a terrific guy. He is an immigrant to America. He grew up in Spain, but he has a number of restaurants all over the world, and his restaurants have Michelin stars. I mean, he's really considered a celebrity chef. But he started something called World Central Kitchen. And when Hurricane Maria was threatening Puerto Rico, and the key to know about this, he didn't have ties to Puerto Rico. He came from Spain and living in America. He's become a citizen. When that hurricane was threatening Puerto Rico, everybody knew it was going to be really bad. So his World Central Kitchen, which is a disaster relief organization, I call him a first food responder. He goes into a disaster situation and usually provides the first setup for food relief, where otherwise there isn't access to food. So he set it up. The hurricane hits, and he served 1,000 meals the first day. And he said he just really felt the sense of urgency he saw around. There was a failure of disaster relief after the hurricane. Too many people were left with no food supply. Turns out before the hurricane, 85% of Puerto Rico's food was imported. So it played a dramatic role when that was all cut off. So he says, I'm just going to double what I do every day. Now, this is a guy, like, he's a chef. When he gave, you know, the commencement address at George Washington University, he opens it by saying, my name is Jose Andres, and I'm a cook. And that's how he sees himself. But he goes down there and sets up this operation with no sort of organizational building background, disaster relief. He had done some things in Haiti and other places, but nothing on this scale. Well, before he's done, he serves 3.7 million meals in Puerto Rico. That was urgency conquering fear, because he had tons of fear. We were texting with him throughout the whole ordeal, and he was scared to death. I mean, he really felt like, can I do it? You know, do I have what it takes? I'm worried about, you know, the people that are here volunteering with me, you name it, fear on several fronts. But it was that urgency of the moment, and we see that time and time again, and I write a lot of stories about people who in that moment stepped up and really were able to do some remarkable things they probably never would have done without that sense of urgency.
That was a wonderful story. You're a great storyteller, by the way. But that was, I mean, that's so wonderful and inspiring. And I read something recently that said, the problem is you think you have time. And that has really stuck with me. You
That's
think
a good
you have
line.
time.
I haven't heard that.
You think you have time. You think you have time. And we don't know how much time we have. We truly don't. So that sense of urgency is so important in being fearless. So thank you for sharing that. And as we get ready to wrap up our conversation here and then go into Q&A, one final question I have for you. If there's someone in here and they are just on the edge of their seat, ready to make a change, whether it's a big bet or whether they want to reach beyond their bubble, whatever that is, and they've been letting fear hold them back up until now. I mean, whether it's they start tonight, they make a phone call, they get online, they start a business, they do whatever that thing is that's holding them back. What would you say to them to tell them to do it, to give them that sense of urgency?
I would say that, what Jane Goodall wrote, the foreword in my book, and I was so blown away that she wanted to write the foreword. She is, of course, among our most iconic National Geographic explorers. And she wrote in the foreword, "There's never been a more important time in history than right now to be fearless." That's what I would say to you. I think you all see things every day as you wake up and go about your life, no matter what your life is. I know you see things that could be made better, a way we can sort of create a better world. And if you have an idea out there, listen to Jane Goodall, who, when Jane talks, I listen. Okay, that's probably what I'd say.
Well, when Jean Case talks, I listen, and I think everybody else in the room does too. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you for being fearless and inspiring all of us to be fearless. We truly appreciate you being here today. Can we give it up for Jean Case? So I think at this time we will open the floor for questions. Look at that already.
Look at that. We have
you.
the first fearless question already. You barely even asked for it and the hand went up.
I'm so proud.
You talked about 75 or 79% of venture funding going to 3 cities. The relatively low percentage that goes to women, I think we could add African Americans into that compared to the percent of population. I heard that this morning you talked about the concept of inclusive capitalism, and I wonder if you have some thoughts based on everything you've seen about how we do better with those folks who tend to get left out, while the 1 or 2 or 3 or 5% of us mostly benefit from the kinds of things that go on in this building and in this city.
Sure. Thank you for your question. I will say I was heartened today because when we met with the entrepreneurs, we also met with some of what we call ecosystem builders, which are the accelerators or incubators that really help train up, often provide capital and mentoring to entrepreneurs, but they were specifically inclusive focused, so people of color or women. They're in your community. There were many fine folks with us today. In fact, if anyone upstairs from an inclusive accelerator is in the audience, can you raise your hand so we can point to you? Okay, right here, here we go. So they're really out there, and I would say if you can support them, that's truly a way to grow the pie. If you know a young entrepreneur or even a not young entrepreneur that is a woman or a person of color, do you have some time that you could mentor them? The mentoring piece is probably, I might argue, more valuable than the capital, but certainly equally as important as capital. And the reason I want to point to those doing the work of some of these inclusive cohorts of entrepreneurs is that's a great channel in. Like, we all have bubbles that we live in. And so we might want to do something, but we might not know where to start. And I'm saying that's really a great place to start. But boy, do we really, your community needs to be concerned about this, and our nation needs to be concerned about this. It's out there if it's something you care about. And because this is a community that spans Kentucky and Ohio, the other place I'd say is if you really just want to cold call a university. They'll put you into a number of different tracks where you could learn different ways. You could help sort of grow that next crop and support that next crop of entrepreneurs that we hope will be more inclusive.
Trying to be fearless.
Yeah, you go.
You're doing it, girl.
Thank you so much for coming today. You're inspiring me. Everything that you said so far, I'm going to go buy the book because I want to be fearless. I want to be an entrepreneur. I've been in the nonprofit community for a long time. But what would you say, my question for you is, what would you say to someone or anyone out there else in the same situation that grew up in poverty and doesn't have a lot of resources and doesn't really know where to start? Like I've been like going round and around and around, like I don't know where to start. I have this great idea and I think it's gonna be amazing, like groundbreaking, but I don't know where to start. What would you say? And then the second question was, if there was one like book or something, the one thing that every entrepreneur should have, what would it be?
Be fearless. Are you kidding?
Besides your book.
Why do you think I'm here? No, I'm kidding. To your question of how to get a start, Madam C.J. Walker said, I got to start by giving myself a start. The first chapter of my book is called Start Right Where You Are. And it really does make clear story after story of people who seemingly thought they had nothing to bring to the table, but realized maybe there was something they could bring to the table. So the first story is a remarkable woman who, you looking at her in the beginning of the story would have said, sort of ordinary person, like we might say. I don't think anyone's ordinary, but I mean, if we're using that term. And so she was a sole practitioner and a single mom. And she was a mental health provider. She didn't even have an assistant. She used like an answering machine, okay? Like really, this is like one person in one office. And she was doing mental health counseling in the DC area as Iraq and Afghanistan wars were kind of at their peak, and it was disproportionately tough on military families in the Washington area. Those, several soldiers, men and women, were doing multiple tours of duty, and it was taking a serious toll on families. But here's the thing, we didn't really plan for that war well in advance, and we didn't have the capacity to help the families. So Barbara is her name, and she started seeing families once a week, pro bono. Then she called her friends and said, hey, can you see this family? Can you see this family? And then she came up with an idea. So this is one woman, one office, no MBA, answering machine. And she says, I want to start a national network. And I want to ask doctors around the nation to give an hour a week to our military families during this time of crisis. She felt urgency conquering fear in her mind. So she, just looked at, well, what do I have to give? I can give 1 hour, which then led to a much bigger idea. She formed the national network. It is called Give an Hour. There are thousands and thousands of doctors all over the United States that now give an hour. More than $25 million in pro bono health care has gone forward. And Time named her because of what she did among the 100 most influential people in the world. And I start with her story because, she was struggling. She's a single mom. She, as I said, she didn't have resources to bring to the party. And look what she did. But there's story after story after story in the book like that. They inspired me. And I have seen their effect on other people too.
My question, it kind of relates, coming from a startup that's, the founders are all minority or women. What if you have an idea and you have proof of principle in science that is so breakthrough that can help one of the biggest problems in people's lives as well as with the economy of this country and around the world, but it's so large that it's hard for others to get on board and support it, such as through social impact investing? How do you attract it and how do you make it manageable so that they can understand it actually could be real?
What do you mean it's so large that they can't see it? I just want to make sure I understand your question.
Truly solving a problem that is really about extending people's lives and solving a healthcare challenge that's enormous. And so they look at it and say, could it be possible?
Yeah. Well, I have a quote in the book from Henry Ford, and he says, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. I mean, the fact of the matter is, the big breakthroughs, can I tell you, if my head looks a little flat, it's from my years of building AOL, where it's like, good luck with that. Whoever needs an email account, what would I do with it? Or a website. And so often some of the most transformational ideas can't be seen. you have to be undaunted by that. You have to find the people who will see the potential value in it. And I know it's easy to say, harder to do, so I don't want to sound too cute up here. But there's somebody out there who's going to see it if it's real. And I would say if I have any frustration as an investor, and I judge pitch competitions a lot, and I invest in a lot of entrepreneurs and funds, it's sometimes that the idea isn't big enough, that they aren't really taking a big bet approach because they're trying to do something incremental. And it's like, fine, those 3 investors might want that. I'm looking for something bigger. So there are investors out there that want those transformational ideas. But the story of AOL was at our peak, we carried half of the nation's internet traffic. But it was a 10-year overnight sensation. It was probably, I mean, when, this is when our parents said, what do you do again? We don't really understand. And so sometimes it takes a little longer to find them. Sometimes it takes a little longer to get believers. But that's sometimes when you know you're onto something big.
So one of the questions I had was, I mean, it's wonderful to hear the young lady's story about, you have an idea, and then the other ladies stand up here who has an organization. But as community members, like my husband and I are, what have you seen as other ways that we can help support we're not entrepreneurs, we had a business and we sold it, but how can we continue to give back? And what have you seen in other areas that's been the most impactful, I guess would be my thing.
Yeah. Well, Eric is going to take the microphone from you. And Eric and Bill and Pete, who are part of making this happen, they are, significantly tied into the entrepreneurial community here. So I talked about, maybe going to some of the inclusive accelerators, but places like this are transformational in a community. Places like the work like they do every day with entrepreneurs are critical. So if you feel you have something to bring or you want to spend, I would say talk to someone here as a starter. And if they don't have a role for you, my guess is they will find a way potentially to integrate your interest. They will know others who will. Is that fair, Eric?
Thank you. You're in the right room today. I would just ask everyone around, or they may come to you and say, oh, you want
Yeah, if you just sit in your chair, my guess is you might get approached.
Yes, here. Thank you for being so authentic. And I want to ask you a personal question. We all admire you. You've transcended all probably milestones that anyone here can dream of. But I have a feeling that you still have some fears at time. And my question is very personal. What are your fears today?
Yeah. I have fears all the time. And they're probably too many to mention. But I was telling the team upstairs that I met with before I came down that the book is called Be Fearless, right? And so this is my first book. Maybe it'll be my only book. And when you're on a book tour, you have to be a little promotional. And I am fierce at championing for other people and for ideas I care about. Really not fierce promoting myself or something I have going on. So in kind of a weird way, I have a fear of talking about Be Fearless. And I have to really get out of my comfort zone to just, like literally even in media interviews, Kyla, I'm sure you know this, like about my new book. And that just feels like so uncomfortable still. But, I get the shtick. This is kind of what you have to do. And the book is a mission-oriented book, if that isn't clear. We are on a mission to really inspire people and get, as I said earlier, all the people and ideas on the field. But it's hard, and I have fear all the time.
That's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm born and raised in Cincinnati, so I'm glad you love our city. Really appreciate you so much. My name is Sharon, and I could either talk to 1,000 people, but I'm an up-and-coming entrepreneur myself, and I'm a little bit afraid. In fact, I'm shaking right now, but I'm actually, when I do suicide prevention, the last time I was here in this building, that's what I was here for, a suicide prevention project. And there is a company in Chicago called Sip of Hope. It's a cafe. And I want to sister that here. in our city because suicide is the second leading cause of death for our youth. And I wanted to build a place for hope and community here in our city. So I thought I would share that once instead of talking to a lot.
Hey, I love that. That is you being fearless right here. Did you hear her?
Sit right here. Thank you.
Thank you. That, much respect to you. It's really an important area, and I wish you all the best with it.
So this is a question about your other job. The National Geographic is the one print publication that we get. It's been in my life for over a half a century.
Thank you.
And it has, since I was a very young child, it has taken my imagination places. I literally have traveled the world because of everything I've seen in the National Geographic. It has educated me in ways that we all know our schools don't do and can't do, so thank you for that. In our world today, in our country, our own government denies science, denies facts. Are there fearless conversations that are taking place at the National Geographic right now to combat this?
Oh, most definitely. And I'll talk in just a minute about an issue we put out called Cool It. But, today, down through time, National Geographic explorers have tended to be scientists and explorers, photographers. Today, National Geographic explorers are entrepreneurs too, because they're building such exciting companies that are all about our mission, and I talk about some of them in the book. And so that's a big important change that ties back to some of the stuff that we're talking about here. But the brand, and I literally mean this with total authenticity, I take no credit for where the brand is. That is 131 years of brand equity that I sort of just get to stand behind, which is really exciting. But when we walk the halls of Congress, the Democrats are like, oh, you're us. The Republicans are like, you are just us. And it's really a beautiful thing to see that it's a brand that has been truth-telling, that has brought hard facts forward for a really long time, without a political agenda. We had a whole issue called Cool It 2 years ago that was entirely about climate change. We got not only calls, but then meetings with Republican members of Congress who were influenced by what we put in the magazine. So I think we care deeply about, we say we've spent 131 years exploring our planet and space. We're going to spend a big part of our resources in the coming years trying to protect our planet and address this crisis that we have.
All right, my name is Van Jones, and I'm one of the co-founders of a startup. And I was wondering, when you think about the big bets that most excite you, could you expand upon what those big bets are? And are any of those big bets in Africa?
Is that a tee up? I'm a big fan of the company that Van is a co-founder of, and I've talked about it here in Cincinnati today, called Hello Tractor. And the idea is that smallhold farmers, I thought you were going to talk about this, smallhold farmers in Africa can't afford the kind of equipment that you need to really get the highest yields. And so Hello Tractor allows for a smaller footprint tractor that can actually be part of a sharing economy. So Jane needs it for 3 hours. Am I doing it justice, Jane? I'm sure you would tell it better. Jane needs it for 3 hours on Saturday, and then Joe can have it for 2 hours on Friday. And that way they don't have to have that, capital investment in order to really begin to build up their yields and grow their farms. But the reason I bring that up is I'm very excited about the potential for inclusive entrepreneurs who come from different places like Africa. I took the entire senior team of the Case Foundation across Africa looking at the entrepreneurial ecosystem there. And I'm telling you, solutions that Africans are building for Africa are solutions for the world in ways that they're never going to think about in Silicon Valley, period, but will apply in many communities in Kentucky, in Ohio, in places across the United States, things I could have used when I was a kid being raised by a single mom. So I'm super excited about this sort of new class of innovations that will come from inclusive entrepreneurs because they see different problems, they've lived different problems. Super excited about impact investing, which is why I was delighted to come and be part of that today. I think this powerful idea, the capital can do so much more when invested than just bring a shareholder return. I think it will save capitalism. And I think without it, I have a lot of concerns. And so, those are just two big areas that we're very inclusive entrepreneurship and impact investing are kind of the two central areas of focus for us right now. We tend to have what we call some tentpole initiatives. They're always movement building. We have two of them at the Case Foundation right now. It's not the extent of our work, but it's the two main focus areas. And we're in those because I believe that they can really transform things and bring opportunity where it doesn't exist today. When we were in Africa, there's a firm called Andela, and they basically, I'm sure you know Andela, you've probably been to Andela, they basically teach Africans coding. But they don't just teach them coding like, oh, that's nice, you know how to code. They get them skilled up by working for some of the most successful technology companies in America, like Facebook and Google. And they had a sign over their door, which we've used too, which says, talent is universal, opportunity is not. And so what I love about inclusive entrepreneurship and impact investing is that will bring opportunity where it has not existed, and that has to be good for the world.
Absolutely, and I love those big bets. Those are some incredible big bets. We're looking forward to seeing your return on those big bets as we keep an eye on Jean Case, the Case Foundation, National Geographic, author of Be Fearless. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. And Jean will have books for sale, everyone, and we'll be signing them. So if you do not have your copy yet, you can purchase a copy tonight, and you can also get it signed. She's going to make her way down, I believe, shortly, down into the area right below where we are to allow you to buy those books and get those signed. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. Again, my name is Kyla Woods.
We have one more. One more thing. This is an exciting week in Startup Cincy, so this was kind of the kickoff to that, welcoming Jean Case in. But I got a friend, I don't know, want to introduce him about a couple other things happening this week. But Alan, why don't you tell him?
I was going to propose, but we're already married, so I just wanted to thank Centrifuge, Startup Cincy, and the entire community and let you guys know I'm one of the founders of Mortar, and this is our 4th year of doing Future History Now, and it is now a 3-day event where we celebrate minority inclusion and women entrepreneurs. So we are taking the tail end of Black History Month and going right into Women's History Month. So we have 3 days of events that start tomorrow, and we would love to see you at all of the events. If you go to our website, it's just Our Future History Now, OurFutureHistoryNow.com. You can see all of the events that we have, and we'll be right back here in the beer hall on Thursday. We have 2 different panel discussions, and I think that you're going to be amazed by what is happening in the startup community. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Wendy. Thanks for being here. And thank you all so much. Again, get your copy, get it signed. Be safe going home. I'm Kyla Woods. Thanks so much for being here.